The morning began with rain. Not the dramatic kind that sweeps across rooftops like an argument between gods, but a slow, tired drizzle that soaked Paris without conviction. At the Quai des Orfèvres, the grey light of the Seine filtered through the fogged windows, settling over the cluttered desk of Chief Inspector Maigret like a thin film of melancholy. His pipe had gone cold an hour ago. The coffee beside it had congealed into a bitter stain. On the blotter lay a single telegram, creased at the edges, bearing a message so short and so vague it felt almost insolent. Urgent, death at Hotel Bern, room marked private, police requested. Maigret stared at the word. Private longer than he meant to. In his world, the word rarely meant what it claimed. Privacy in Paris was a kind of fiction, one bought, guarded, or stolen. Behind every locked door lay someone's lie, someone's fear, someone's end. He drew the window open, letting in the sour breath of the Seine, and stood there in his shirt sleeves, heavy eyes, tracing the outlines of barges dissolving in the mist. He had solved dozens of murders, interrogated hundreds of men, and smoked enough tobacco to fill a railway car. But there was something about that single word, private, that unsettled him. He took his overcoat, nodded to Janvier, and stepped into the rain. Somewhere across the river, a door was waiting, one marked not for the public, not for friends or lovers, but for secrets that would not stay buried. And as always, Maigret would knock. If you find yourself drawn into these shadows, if you can almost smell the pipe smoke, feel the drizzle on the pavements, and hear the echo of Maigret's shoes in the corridor, then stay with us. Like the inspector himself, you'll want to see what lies behind the door marked private. And if stories like this speak to you, stories of Paris at its most mysterious, then remember to subscribe, share this tale, and step once more into Maigret's quiet, rain-soaked world. The day began, as so many of Maigret's days did, with silence, a silence that pressed softly against the glass panes of the office, thickened by rain and the slow exhalation of the Seine. The streets below were glistening with that particular sheen Paris wears only after a long night of drizzle. Cobblestones turned to mirrors, carriages trailing ribbons of mist, umbrellas blooming like dark flowers under gas lamps not yet extinguished. The air smelled faintly of wet wool and roasted chestnuts from a vendor outside, but inside the walls of the Quai des Orfèvres there was only the whisper of dripping gutters and the muted scrape of Janvier turning pages at his desk. Maigret sat in his chair as if the morning itself were an interrogation. The pipe between his fingers had long gone out, but he kept it there anyway, a habit more than a need. His mind was empty in that peculiar way that precedes thought, the kind of emptiness where instincts sharpen. He was watching the rain collect on the window ledge when the telegram arrived, carried in by a young constable whose boots left small puddles on the floor. The boy seemed almost apologetic, as though the message itself were to blame for intruding on the inspector's stillness. The envelope was thin, pale yellow, creased at one corner. Maigret turned it over once, twice, before opening it with the small knife he used for his cigars. The words inside were few, printed in block capitals that betrayed haste. Urgent. Death at Hotel Bern. Room marked. Private. Police requested. He read it twice, the way he always did. Once for the words, once for what hid between them. Hotel Bern. He knew the name vaguely. A modest establishment on the left bank, the sort that pretended to refinement without quite achieving it. The phrase, room marked private, lingered, gnawed at him like a memory he couldn't place. He had seen that word used before, painted on frosted glass doors in brasseries, tacked onto storerooms, whispered in corridors where one was not supposed to go, but there was something about the way it stood alone in this telegram, cold and capitalized, that unsettled him. He folded the paper slowly, slid it into his coat pocket, and rose. Janvier looked up from his files. "Another?" Maigret nodded, pulling on his heavy overcoat. "Hotel Bern, near Montparnasse. Death reported." "Suicide or murder?" "Too early," Maigret said, reaching for his hat. "But they wouldn't have sent for me if it was simple." He stepped into the corridor, the air cool and faintly metallic with the smell of ink and wet boots. The clerk at the front desk gave him a nod, and Maigret answered with the briefest flick of his pipe hand. Outside, the rain had thinned into a mist that hung in the air rather than fell. Paris was blurred at the edges, a city half asleep, half erased. He crossed the Pont Saint-Michel, the Seine beneath him dark and slow-moving. On mornings like these, the river seemed almost alive, breathing under the bridges, carrying away the confessions of a city that never stopped talking. A barge moved past, its silhouette melting into the fog, a man at the helm raising a hand in greeting. Maigret didn't return it. His mind was already elsewhere, circling the word private the way a hound circles a scent. By the time he reached the Boulevard de Montparnasse, the café windows had begun to glow with the first signs of life. Waiters in aprons wiped down tables. A girl in a cloche hat hurried past, clutching her umbrella against the wind, and a tram bell rang somewhere down the street, sounding both lonely and routine. Maigret paused to light his pipe, cupping the flame against the drizzle. The first draw of tobacco tasted sharp, almost medicinal. He exhaled slowly, watching the smoke dissolve into the mist. The Hotel Bern stood at the corner of a narrow side street, a building of 5 floors with chipped paint and curtains that had seen better years. A red awning hung limply above the entrance, and through the frosted glass of the door he could make out the shadow of the concierge pacing nervously. Maigret pushed the door open, the brass bell tinkling with a faint, tired sound. "Inspector Maigret," he said quietly. The concierge, a woman of about 50, with sharp eyes and a cardigan buttoned wrong, started at the name. "Ah, yes, Monsieur l'Inspecteur. It's upstairs, the 3rd floor. I didn't touch anything, as the sergeant told me." "Who found him?" "The chambermaid. Poor girl nearly fainted, said the door was marked private, but she had to go in because of the smell. That's when she saw him." Maigret's gaze drifted to the guest register open on the counter. The last name entered was written in a careful, almost clerkly hand. Armand Delpierre, Dijon. He tapped the pen beside it, then looked back at the woman. "How long had he been here?" "4 days, monsieur. Quiet man, paid in cash, didn't go out much." Maigret nodded. "Show me." The stairwell was narrow and smelled of varnish and damp carpets. On the 3rd floor, a single gaslight burned low, its flame trembling like a nervous heart. The door in question stood at the end of the corridor. A small white card had been pinned to it. Private, the letters printed in fading ink, the corners curled. The sergeant on duty saluted awkwardly as Maigret approached. Inside, the air was stale, heavy with the scent of kerosene and something sweeter, perfume perhaps, or brandy spilled days ago. The room was modest, a writing desk, a narrow bed, a chair near the window. In that chair sat the body, a man in his 40s, clean-shaven, dressed in a brown suit. His head rested against the backrest at an unnatural angle, eyes half open, as though caught in mid-thought. On the table beside him stood a glass, half full, and beside it a small brass key. Maigret bent closer, examining the man's hands. No signs of struggle. The fingertips bore faint ink stains, the kind left by someone who wrote often. The key glimmered dully in the light of the gas lamp. He picked it up, turning it over. No engraving, no tag, just a key, smooth from use. "Who locked the door?" he asked. "No one, monsieur," the sergeant replied. It was closed, not locked. The maid knocked, got no answer, and went in. Maigret straightened, his shadow stretching long across the wall. And this sign, who put it there? The concierge hesitated. "He did, monsieur, on the first day. Said he didn't want to be disturbed." Of course he didn't, Maigret thought. No one ever wants to be disturbed until the world forces its way in. He walked to the window. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving behind a grey sheen over the rooftops. Somewhere below, a cart rolled past, its wheels echoing against the stones. He looked once more at the dead man, not with curiosity, but with that quiet empathy that had long since replaced surprise in him. Every corpse carried its own dignity, its own unfinished sentence. The brass key, the faint scent of perfume, the word private. They were fragments of a story that had already ended. His task was to read it backward. Maigret turned to Janvier, who had just arrived, out of breath. "Have the doctor come, and bring Lucas. Discreetly. I don't want the press sniffing yet." Janvier nodded. "Suicide?" Maigret relit his pipe, his eyes never leaving the dead man's face. "Perhaps. But if so, it's the most polite one I've ever seen." He stood there for a moment longer, listening to the quiet hum of the room, as if waiting for it to confess something. Then he exhaled a plume of smoke that curled toward the ceiling, like a question without an answer. The key still lay in his palm, warm now from his touch. He slipped it into his pocket. Some doors were meant to be opened. Some were meant to stay closed, and some, the ones marked private, led not just to rooms, but to the parts of people that even death struggled to hide. Outside, the rain began again, soft and steady, as if Paris itself were whispering secrets through the fog. The doctor came with the smell of wet wool clinging to his cuffs and a little black bag that had known a lifetime of sudden endings. He was a quiet man, with rimless spectacles and hands that moved with the distracted economy of one who has seen the same scene too often to invest it with surprise. He bent over the body, lifted an eyelid, pressed 2 fingers at the throat, not because he expected a pulse, but because ritual demanded it. When he finally spoke, it was in the tone of a schoolmaster reading from a primer. The time was difficult to declare. The room gave back its hours grudgingly. The man had not eaten since the previous evening. There was no brutal trauma. The air, the glass, the slight flush about the cheeks, the faint trace at the corner of the mouth. The doctor named possibilities with the caution of a man stepping onto an unlit stair. A sleeping draught, perhaps. A heart quickened by poison that behaved like mercy. He would know more when the stomach told its truth at the laboratory. He closed his bag and left, as he had arrived, his steps soundless on the plush that had kept too many secrets. Lucas came next, shrugging his big shoulders as if trying to shake off the rain. He stood by the door with the patience of a farmhand brought into a parlour. Janvier, who had already made a tidy list of nothing much, hovered near the desk. Maigret remained by the chair, not touching, only filling the space with his pipe smoke and his unhurried gaze. Outside the window, the city continued its grey work, but inside the room, time had folded back on itself, wrapping the scene in the peculiar stillness that follows an answer given in the wrong language. "Delpierre," Lucas murmured, reading the card the sergeant had found in the man's pocketbook. "From Dijon." "Names are obedient," Maigret said. "It's the lives that misbehave." He knelt slightly, Not for the body, but for the key on the table, turning it once more between his fingers. You see, Lucas, no engraving, no hotel number, not a wardrobe key, not the front door, a habit key, the sort a man carries to feel that he belongs somewhere. Yet he didn't belong here, Janvier added, gesturing at the room's impersonal neatness, the bed with its tight corners, the wash basin with its towels folded like a promise never kept. The desk offered the first hint of personality and immediately regretted it. A blotter with a square of darker paper where a letter had lain until very recently, a bottle of cheap ink, a fountain pen wiped clean, a packet of cigarettes from a tobacconist near the Gare de Lyon, 2 receipts from a brasserie that served unadventurous stews, and a folded page of a provincial newspaper. Maigret passed a finger over the blotter as if heat might coax the last words back. He leaned, squinted, then straightened again. The paper square, darker than the rest, had protected the leather from the sun that never truly reached this window. The letter had been there for days or hours, who could say, and was now somewhere else, or with someone else, or reduced to ash. He thought of the glass half full. Men who decide to leave the world seldom pour themselves a moderate drink. That, too, stuck like a burr. "Look at the lamp," he said softly. The gas mantle hissed with a tremulous light. Beneath it, on the little enamelled switch, a smudge of powder had settled in the ring-shaped groove, the grey bloom you find on curtains left alone in guest rooms. If the lamp had been on all night, the heat would have baked that fine dust into nothing. Someone had turned it down only recently, someone who knew how to make a room look as if it had been waiting in the dark. Lucas frowned. "The maid says the door was shut but not locked. He put up the sign himself. The concierge confirms it." "Of course." Maigret walked to the door. The card, private, had been pinned with a little brass tack that bit deep into the wood. He removed it and held the card to his nose. There was the dull odour of old ink and something subtler, like the ghost of perfume in a coat sleeve. Not the heavy sweetness some women favoured, but a clean, powdery trace, fleeting as a secret flicked across a table in a cafe. He turned the card over, on the back, a faint indentation. Someone had written on it once, or pressed something against it. He slid it into his pocket with the key. "Shall I have the staff lined up, patron?" Lucas asked. "Not yet." Maigret's eyes drifted toward the carpet, where the nap lay smoother in a little crescent between the desk and the chair. A man who went often from the pen to the glass and back. A rhythm of thought, of hesitation. He crouched, then placed a hand on the carpet edge by the skirting board. It came away with a pale thread stuck to one finger, finer than cotton, pale as morning smoke. He rolled it thoughtfully, then held it to the light. It broke at the gentlest pressure. A hair, perhaps, but too fine. A thread from a glove, from a lady's scarf, from a handkerchief smoothed too often by anxious hands. The wardrobe confessed nothing. Inside, a brown overcoat hung beside a hat whose felt carried the faint impression of a broad forehead. In the coat pocket, a small notebook with the black elastic strap found on every stationer's shelf in the city. Names and numbers ran across its pages, some crossed out with the bluntness of finality. One page had been torn. Another contained a Paris address near Rue Lepic. The pen that had written it was firmer there, the stroke impatient. "Dijon to Montmartre," Janvier said. "An odd pilgrimage. Men are faithful to their habits, not their addresses." Maigret closed the wardrobe gently, as if not to wake a sleeping child. And sometimes, to their shame, they lifted the body, as careful with it as with a sleeping guest. Under the chair, the shadow of a stain had dried, darker than the surrounding wool, not wine, not coffee, something that had leached slowly, then given up. He touched it and felt only the cool roughness of dye. The chair creaked once as if protesting the intrusion. On the windowsill, a tiny crescent of ash waited like a punctuation mark at the end of a silent sentence. He tapped the bowl of his pipe, compared the granules reflexively, then brushed the crescent into his palm. It was too pale for his tobacco. A different blend, finer cut, perhaps with a floral note that clung to the fingertips. He pocketed that too. The concierge arrived, wringing her hands with theatrical restraint. She had the manner of someone who wished to appear helpful without becoming involved, and her cardigan still misbuttoned by one place, as though guilt had crept under her clothes and could be put right with a simple correction. Maigret led her to the corridor, keeping his voice low, a conversational murmur rather than an inquiry. "Madame, who occupied the neighbouring rooms?" "The corner room is empty, monsieur. The other is let to a commercial traveller from Reims." He snores, I could swear to it. "And the private door?" "It leads nowhere, monsieur. The old owners joined 2 rooms long ago. We keep the sign to prevent the staff from entering when there are repairs. It pleases guests to feel they have a space not to be disturbed." "It pleases men like the late Monsieur Delpierre?" She dropped her eyes. He was correct. He paid without discussion, asked for coffee in the morning, and a tray in the evening. He spoke little. He received very few visitors. "But he received visitors," Maigret said. She hesitated. The pause lengthened until it sparked. "A gentleman, perhaps on the second day? Or a lady? I prefer not to be precise where I cannot be certain." "The door made it easy not to be certain," Maigret said gently. "Who has a key to this floor apart from the maid?" "No one. The maids have each their ring. I have the master. The guests lock their own rooms when they wish." "But this door remained unlatched," Janvier said, appearing with a paper bag for the glass and a respectful impatience in his posture. "Not quite," Maigret corrected. He returned to the desk, drew out the shallow drawer 1 inch, then another. There at the back lay a little metal plate with a notch. He lifted it and showed it to Lucas. He could have fastened the door from within so that it appeared shut without being locked, the sort of trick a man learns in hotels. "Why?" Lucas asked. "So that someone could enter without fuss, seeing the card and obeying it, to keep the staff away, to reassure a visitor, to feel safe while doing something unsafe." He replaced the plate precisely, as if reluctant to disturb the habit of a dead man. The doctor's men came to take the body, and the rooms sighed, as rooms do when their purpose has been fulfilled. Maigret watched as the sheet was drawn, and the awkward dignity of removal commenced. He was not thinking about death. He was thinking about preparation. The rearranged lamp, the letter that had left its imprint and left the building, the ash that was not his, the card that carried a perfume too light for memory, but strong enough for doubt. In the lobby, the air felt cooler, even though the stove had been fed with fresh coal and crackled as if applauding its own stubbornness. A girl sat on the edge of a velvet chair, her back too straight for comfort, a handbag pressed to her lap as though it might fly away if she loosened her fingers. She could have been any typist from any office in any arrondissement. She could have been the one woman in Paris who was not pretending to be someone else. She raised her eyes when Maigret entered, and the movement was small, like a curtain lifting on a stage where the play had started before the audience took their seats. "Inspector," the concierge said, hovering. "Mademoiselle Vernet asked to speak with the police. She says she must give a letter to the gentleman upstairs." "The gentleman upstairs has no need of letters," Maigret said. He removed his hat, shook from its brim the last of the rain, and felt the room tilt almost imperceptibly toward the girl. The stove sighed again, and somewhere beyond the frosted panes a tram bell counted out an hour that had no patience left in it. He glanced once more at the staircase, at the corridor now occupied only by the echo of steps that had ceased, at the door where the word "private" hung like a commandment. He touched the card in his pocket without looking, then approached the girl who could not stop smoothing the fabric of her gloves. "Your name?" he said softly, before she offered it, and before the lie or the truth could collect itself in her mouth. The smell of damp wool and coal smoke mingled with a lighter scent, not perfume exactly, but cleanliness given a shape. Her eyes were tired, the kind of tiredness that comes from not having slept because one's thoughts are too loud to put to bed. She swallowed. "Léonie Vernet," she said. "I used to type letters for Monsieur Delpierre. I brought one today because he asked for it by telegram. But they told me... She faltered. The lobby's mirror showed a man with a broad face and a worn hat standing not quite between her and the door, not quite between her and the truth. He nodded as if to a child who had remembered the first lines of a lesson and needed help with the second. "Sit, Mademoiselle Vernet," he said. "You will give me the letter instead." Her hands tightened on the handbag as if the leather itself might advise her. The stove crackled. A guest coughed in a distant corridor as if performing his part in a play he had not rehearsed. Maigret waited, and in the waiting there was the whole case, as inevitable as rain returning to a city that never properly dried. Léonie Vernet's hands were small and tense, the fingers knotted around her handbag as if it contained her heartbeat. The light from the lobby's single chandelier made her look even paler, her eyes too wide for the room. Maigret studied her without speaking. Years of interrogations had taught him that silence, when handled correctly, said more than any question. The girl's breathing betrayed her. Shallow, uneven, the breath of someone who had rehearsed explanations but not guilt. She looked as though she had walked through the rain without realizing it. Damp threads of hair clung to her temples. Her coat, neatly buttoned, bore the faint watermark of a long wait outside. The city had its way of marking those who had hesitated before coming to the police. Her gloves, a delicate cream shade that once might have suggested innocence, were now creased and grey at the fingertips. "Sit, mademoiselle," Maigret said again, his voice neither kind nor stern, but patient, the kind of patience that made others talk. She obeyed. The chair's velvet swallowed her with a sigh. "You came to see Monsieur Delpierre," he said. "Yes." Her voice trembled at first, then steadied. "He sent for me." "In what way?" "A telegram." She reached into her handbag, rummaging among a few neatly folded handkerchiefs and a small mirror. When she withdrew the slip of paper, Maigret saw that it had been handled too often. The edges were soft, the ink faintly blurred where a thumb had rested. It read, simply, L. Vernet. "Bring letter, as discussed. Hotel Bern, 10 o'clock. A.D." The detective turned the paper between his fingers. The handwriting was precise, almost fastidious, the kind that belonged to a man who believed that neatness could conceal intent. "When did you receive this?" "Yesterday morning. I worked until 6 at the office. Then I wrote what he'd asked." "You say as discussed. When was that discussion?" "Last week. He came to the office late. My employer had already left, but Monsieur Delpierre said he needed a letter typed urgently, one that mustn't be seen by anyone else." "What kind of letter?" She hesitated. "A personal one, monsieur, to a woman." Maigret nodded slightly, his eyes half-lidded, watching her not so much for the words as for the pauses. Do you remember her name? Yes, Madame Lefebvre, Rue des Martyrs. And this letter? Do you have it still? Her eyes flickered. The handbag moved slightly on her lap, as though it too had taken a breath. Yes. He told me not to post it until I saw him again. He said he might change his mind. May I see it? She hesitated only a moment, then opened the bag again. The envelope she withdrew was cream-coloured, sealed but not stamped. The handwriting matched the telegram. Maigret took it gently, holding it by the edges, and examined the seal. A small, neat impression. The letter A, inside a circle, pressed with the precision of someone who found meaning in order. He did not open it. Instead, he laid it flat on the table beside them. You came here to deliver this? Yes, monsieur, at 10 o'clock as he asked, but when I arrived, the concierge said there had been an accident. Did you speak to anyone else? No, I waited. I thought perhaps there was some mistake. I waited almost an hour. Her composure cracked for the first time. Monsieur, I swear I didn't know anything. I only came because he told me to. I thought he wanted to send the letter himself. Did he seem afraid last week? She looked at the tiled floor. Tired? Nervous, perhaps? He said something about people watching him, but he often said strange things. Strange? He talked to himself sometimes, muttered about debts, about people who owed him favors. He wasn't cruel, just anxious, like a man walking in circles around his own thoughts. Maigret leaned back. The stove popped softly in the corner. The detective's face, half hidden in pipe smoke, remained unreadable. And you, mademoiselle, why were you still working there if he was gone to Paris? I needed the work. My employer, Monsieur Cottard, said I might help Delpierre from time to time with correspondence. He paid me directly. So you were his typist, sometimes his messenger? She nodded. And did he ever ask you to destroy letters? Her silence lengthened. Then very softly, once. Maigret's eyes lifted from the pipe to her face. Tell me. It was last month. He came into the office when no one else was there. He had a letter in his hand already sealed. He said it was a mistake and that I was to burn it. I did as he asked, but before I did, I saw the address. He thought it was the same woman, Madame Lefebvre. She looked up suddenly as though expecting accusation. Maigret only nodded again as though she had confirmed something he had already guessed. And did he pay you for your silence? Her eyes widened. No, monsieur, I swear he didn't. I don't mean blackmail, mademoiselle, Maigret interrupted gently. Only respect. Men like Delpierre pay for silence because they know talk is cheaper than truth. He rose and crossed to the window. Outside, the rain had turned to drizzle again, silvering the street lamp and the wet cobbles. The city looked washed, but not clean. The people below moved like shadows that had forgotten their owners. He could smell the faint perfume she wore, not applied today, but lingering from yesterday's coat. It was the same faint, powdery trace he had found on the card pinned to the dead man's door. He turned back slowly. Tell me, mademoiselle, what were you going to do after giving him this letter? I don't know, go home, I suppose. Alone? Yes. Does anyone know you came here? No. Good, he said simply. You will remain in Paris. Someone will want to speak with you again. Her breath caught. You think I think, Maigret interrupted softly, that Monsieur Delpierre was not alone when he died, and that whoever was with him might not have known what kind of door they were closing. He looked down at the envelope again. We'll keep this for now. She rose, uncertain whether she had been dismissed or spared. Maigret gave her a look that meant both. As she left, her reflection shimmered for a moment in the glass of the lobby mirror, small, fragile, half swallowed by the greyness outside, then vanished into the street. Janvier, who had been pretending to study his notebook nearby, spoke without looking up. "You think she's lying?" Maigret took a long draw from his pipe before answering. "No, but she's afraid of telling the truth, which is worse. Fear distorts honesty. It bends it into shapes that almost look like lies." Lucas arrived with his hat askew and the smell of rain clinging to his coat. "We traced the telegram office, patron. It was sent from the kiosk on Rue Lepic. No signature, cash paid. Clark remembers only that it was a man, middle-aged, clean suit, polite. Could have been our dead man, could have been anyone." Maigret nodded. "Anyone," he repeated, as though the word itself carried weight. He turned back to the letter on the table. The seal gleamed faintly in the lamplight. There were 1,000 ways a letter could betray a man. The words inside, the handwriting, the moment it was sent, or the moment it was not. This one, unopened, already spoke volumes. He slipped it into an evidence envelope, folded it once, and said quietly, "Let's visit Rue de Martyr tomorrow. I'd like to meet this Madame Lefebvre." Lucas raised an eyebrow. "You think she's part of it?" "I think," Maigret said, blowing out the last curl of smoke, "that a dead man who writes to a woman and then dies holding a key was not merely unlucky. He was waiting for someone who arrived on time and left alive." Outside, a carriage rolled past, the hooves striking sparks on the wet stones. The bell above the hotel door chimed softly as a draught of air moved through the lobby. Maigret turned toward it, watching the door sway and settle again, the brass letters on its frosted glass catching a glint of the streetlight. Private. The word looked different now. Not a warning, not a boundary, but a riddle. He watched it for a long moment, the smoke rising slowly from his pipe until the last ember died. The next morning came with a sky that could not decide between fog and daylight. The rain had stopped but left the city bruised and glistening, as though Paris herself had been questioned through the night and now refused to answer. At the Quai des Orfèvres, Maigret's office smelled of tobacco and damp overcoat. Lucas was already there, his hair slicked back with water from the wash basin, reading through a thin dossier that the clerk had compiled on Armand Delpierre. "Nothing remarkable," Lucas said, tapping the folder with a blunt finger. "Born in Dijon, worked there most of his life. Clerk for an insurance firm, later a partner in a small import business. Married once, wife deceased, illness, no children. Rented a small flat on Rue Condorcet when in Paris. No criminal record, no obvious enemies." Maigret took the folder but didn't open it. He stared at the window where condensation had gathered in the corners like old secrets. "And the business?" "Closed 2 years ago, insolvent, but no scandal. His partner, a man named Vernou, remained in Dijon. We've wired the local police for details." "Good." Maigret lit his pipe. "And the woman?" Lucas grinned faintly. "Madame Lefebvre, married, husband runs a modest import shop near the Gare du Nord. She lives comfortably, dresses well, seems respectable." "Respectability," Maigret muttered, "is only fear wearing gloves." He glanced at the letter sealed with the mark of an A. It lay on his desk beside the telegram, the envelope now tagged and numbered. He had resisted opening it. Sometimes restraint revealed more than intrusion. A letter unopened still belonged to the dead. Once opened, it belonged to the living, and the living tended to lie. A knock interrupted his thoughts. Janvier poked his head in. "Someone's here to see you, patron. Says he came from Dijon." Maigret looked up sharply. "Show him in." The man who entered was in his early 50s, tall, thin, with a courteous smile that did not reach his eyes. He wore a dark suit of provincial cut and a bowler hat that had seen both rain and care. When he removed it, Maigret noticed the careful parting of his hair, the nails trimmed too neatly, the faint smell of lavender soap. Everything about him spoke of a man who liked order, but order of the kind that hides dust beneath rugs. "Inspector Maigret," he said, bowing slightly. "My name is Paul Vernou. I was Mr. Delpierre's business partner." Maigret gestured to the chair opposite his desk. "You've come a long way, Monsieur Vernou." "I read of the death in this morning's paper. It was a shock. I thought I might be of assistance." "Kind of you," Maigret said evenly. "How well did you know him?" "Intimately," Vernou replied too quickly. "We worked together for nearly a decade." Maigret leaned back, eyes half closed behind a slow coil of smoke. "You said worked, past tense. Did you quarrel?" Vernou hesitated, then smiled thinly. "Not a quarrel, no, merely a difference in temperament. Armand was, impulsive. He liked ventures that promised more than they delivered. I preferred prudence. And your business failed." Vernou spread his hands, palms pale and immaculate. "Times are difficult, monsieur. The markets turned, clients defaulted. There was no dishonor." Maigret nodded. "Yet Delpierre left Dijon." "Yes, he said he needed a change of air. He'd grown restless." "Restless men seldom choose hotels like the Burn," Maigret murmured. "It's a place for those who wish to disappear, not begin again." Vernou's smile did not falter, but a pulse moved beneath his jaw. "Perhaps he wished to be near certain acquaintances." "Such as?" "I can't say. He had correspondents, women mostly, one in particular." "Madame Lefebvre?" The man blinked just once, but it was enough. "Ah, you know of her?" "I know the name," Maigret said. "Do you?" Vernou's lips tightened. "Everyone in Dijon did. She was married then, too. Armand fancied himself discreet, but small towns have long ears. Did her husband know? Who can say? He was a fool if he didn't." Maigret refilled his pipe slowly, buying time. "Tell me, Monsieur Vernou, why come here at all? You said you read of the death only this morning. You could have written." The man leaned forward, clasping his hands. "Because I feared what might be said. About me, about our business. The papers thrive on scandal. I wanted to ensure the truth was told. And what truth is that? That Armand Delpierre was a good man, flawed, yes, but not wicked. He may have taken his own life, but he was no criminal." Maigret blew out smoke, studying the shape it made between them. "You think it was suicide?" Vernou spread his hands again. "What else? He'd lost his fortune, his health, his pride. Men like Armand, they cannot live with failure." "Perhaps." Maigret stood and walked to the window. "Yet he sent a telegram yesterday morning asking for a letter to be delivered. That does not sound like a man preparing to die." Vernou said nothing. Maigret turned back to him. "Where were you yesterday, Monsieur Vernou?" The question fell softly, but landed hard. Vernou's fingers twitched once before he forced them still. "In Dijon, of course. I have clerks who can attest to it." "Of course," Maigret repeated. There was a knock. Janvier entered, holding a slip of paper. "Report from Dijon, patron." He handed it silently to Maigret and left without looking at the visitor. Maigret unfolded it, his eyes scanning quickly. "Interesting," he said at last. "It seems the business was not as innocent as you suggested. The liquidation was contested, unpaid creditors, missing ledgers." Vernou's composure wavered. "Those matters were settled." "Were they?" Or did your partner take the blame? Vernou stood abruptly. I came here to help, not to be insulted. Maigret's gaze lifted, calm as a blade. Sit down, Monsieur Vernou. We're not finished. The man hesitated, then obeyed, lowering himself with visible effort. A bead of sweat had appeared on his temple, despite the chill in the room. Maigret spoke more gently now, almost as though reasoning with a child. When did you last see Armand Delpierre alive? 3 weeks ago, in Dijon. He came to collect some personal papers. And did you give them to him? Of course. What kind of papers? Contracts, receipts, letters. Letters, Maigret repeated softly. Letters belonging to him or to you? The man's mouth tightened. To the firm. But he took them. Yes. Strange, Maigret said, turning the pipe between his fingers. A man about to kill himself doesn't usually tidy up other people's paperwork, unless he's holding something that frightens someone else. Vernou looked up sharply. I don't know what you mean. I think you do, Maigret said. Tell me, did you send him money recently? No. Then perhaps someone else did, or threatened to. The silence between them thickened. Outside, the bells of Notre Dame tolled faintly through the mist, counting the hour with the calm indifference of stone. Finally, Vernou spoke, his voice low. He wrote to me last month. Said he had something that could clear both our names, or ruin us. I thought it was a bluff. And was it? I don't know, the man whispered. He never sent it. And he came to Paris. I thought he might ask for money. But he didn't. No, Maigret nodded slowly. He asked for a letter instead. From a typist, to a woman. And now he's dead. Vernou swallowed hard. You think I think, Maigret interrupted quietly, that you're clever enough to take the morning train from Dijon and brave enough to walk into the lion's den pretending to be a sheep. The man said nothing. Maigret stepped closer, his shadow falling across the visitor's polished shoes. You'll stay in Paris until I say otherwise. Leave an address with my clerk. And, Monsieur Vernou? He paused, relighting his pipe. Avoid the newspapers. They tend to print names before the truth. When Vernou finally left, Lucas whistled softly. He's hiding something. Maigret nodded, still staring at the door that had just closed. Yes, the question is whether it's his secret or Delpierre's. He walked to the window, watching the mist thicken along the quay. Find out if Vernou had dealings in Paris, friends, creditors, anyone who might have reason to follow him here. Lucas scribbled the order and left. Maigret remained by the window, the grey river shifting below like liquid memory. He thought of the brass key still in his coat pocket, of the perfume that clung to the word private, of the unopened letter waiting like a patient ghost. Somewhere between Dijon and Paris, between two business partners and one dead man, lay a truth too deliberate to be called coincidence. He tapped the ash from his pipe and murmured to the fog, Men don't come to Paris to die. They come to explain why they can't go on living. By the time Maigret reached Montmartre, the rain had retreated to a fine drizzle that made the pavements shine like pewter. The hill, always a little apart from the rest of Paris, still smelled of yesterday's wine and wet plaster. He moved slowly along Rue Lepic, passing grocers pulling in crates, flower sellers wiping down their stalls, and waiters airing out the terraces. The cafes here had the same faces every morning, men who pretended to read newspapers while their eyes followed the street, women in hats that had seen better seasons, the inevitable accordion drifting from somewhere unseen. He stopped outside a place called Café du Point Vert, a modest corner establishment with nicotine-yellowed curtains and a clock that had stopped at 7:30 long ago. It was the sort of place that forgot nothing, but forgave everything. According to the receipts found in Delpierre's room, he had lunched here twice in his last week alive. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of chicory coffee and yesterday's tobacco. The proprietor, a small man with an enormous moustache, was wiping down the zinc counter with a rag that only spread the shine from one place to another. Maigret flashed his card without ceremony. "You remember this man?" he asked, sliding a photograph of the dead Delpierre across the counter. The proprietor frowned, leaned close, and nodded. "Yes, monsieur." He sat by the window, always the same table. Ordered veal stew and a small bottle of Beaujolais. Paid exact. "Did he meet anyone here?" The man shrugged. "He spoke to few. Once, maybe twice, someone joined him, a woman." "What sort of woman?" The shrug again, but slower this time. "Well dressed, gloves, small hat, not the kind you see with a man eating veal stew." "Did you hear them speak?" "I mind my counter, monsieur, but the second time they argued." Maigret's gaze sharpened slightly. "Argued?" "Yes, quietly, like people who know each other too well." She left first, angry. He stayed, drank the rest of his wine, and sat staring at the street for a long while. Then he paid and left. That was 3 days before the papers say he died. Maigret turned slightly, glancing toward the window where Delpierre had supposedly sat. From there one could see the hill's slow descent, the laundresses crossing with baskets, the trams clanging by. A perfect vantage for a man who wished to look out without being noticed. He ordered coffee. The proprietor, relieved to be useful again, hurried to fetch it. Maigret sat in the seat the dead man had favoured, lit his pipe, and studied the scene through the streaked glass. The cup arrived, steaming, bitter. He stirred it once and left it untouched. Every city has its own rhythm of deceit, he thought. In Montmartre it was casual, almost affectionate. Lies here wore perfume and smiled. Somewhere along this street, Delpierre had found both comfort and betrayal. He was still watching the window when a woman entered, mid-30s, sharp-eyed, dressed in a dark coat with a small veil, the kind of woman who expected to be noticed but not questioned. She removed her gloves, finger by finger, ordered a café crème, and glanced toward Maigret with a flicker of interest. When she realized he was looking back, she smiled. Not a friendly smile, not flirtation. More like an acknowledgement between two players in a game neither had named. The proprietor brought her coffee and muttered something under his breath. The woman's reply was too soft to catch, but Maigret saw the man glance his way, uncertain. She sipped, watching him over the rim of her cup. When Maigret finally rose and approached her table, she did not startle. She closed her compact mirror with a deliberate click and said, "You are Inspector Maigret?" "Yes," he said, without asking how she knew. "I thought so. You've been asking about Monsieur Delpierre." "You knew him?" She smiled faintly. "Everyone knew him a little. I, perhaps, a little more." "Your name?" "Claire Lefebvre." He studied her face. The veil shadowed it, but her voice carried the smoothness of someone long accustomed to evasion. "You were expecting me," he said. She raised an eyebrow. "Should I have been?" "Perhaps not, but you seem too calm for surprise." "Surprise is for those who pretend innocence, Inspector. I gave up pretending long ago." Maigret sat opposite her without invitation. The chair creaked under his weight. "You argued with him here, 3 days before his death?" Her smile didn't waver, but her eyes flickered. "Ah, so the little man with the moustache talks as much as he polishes." "Only when asked," Maigret said. "Why did you quarrel?" "Because he was tiresome. He wanted something I couldn't give." Money? She laughed softly. No, forgiveness. For what? For being himself. Her tone was neither cruel nor sentimental. It was the tone of someone who had spent a lifetime walking away from burning rooms without looking back. He told me he was leaving Paris, she continued. He said he'd send a letter. I told him not to. Words never made him clearer. He was a man who believed explanations could undo what had already been done. Did you love him? She looked out the window. Once. In the way women sometimes love men they mistake for change. And when was that? Before Dijon, before debts, before telegrams, before he thought of himself as tragic. Maigret watched the steam curl from her cup. Did he threaten you? She turned her eyes back to him. No. He begged me, which was worse. Begged you for what? To meet him one last time. He said he'd found something that would make me understand. I refused. When was this? The day before he died. Did he mention what he'd found? No, only that it was locked away. Something about a key. Maigret's pipe smoke thickened between them, grey as the fog outside. A brass key? Her lashes lifted a fraction. So you found it? Yes. She finished her coffee and set the cup down precisely on its saucer. Then you know as much as I do, Inspector, perhaps more. Maigret leaned closer. Madame Lefebvre, if you think this is a game— I don't, she interrupted softly. But he did. He loved mystery more than truth. He wanted to be followed, to be missed, to be explained. And now that he's dead, he's finally succeeded. Her voice had changed, not emotional, but weary. There was pity there, perhaps for herself. Maigret stood. You'll remain in Paris. She smiled faintly. Where else would I go? Do you know a man named Vernou? Her fingers froze for an instant on her handbag clasp. Then she rose gracefully. Yes, another man who prefers fog to daylight. You'll find them of the same breed. She slipped on her gloves, each movement precise and unhurried. If you're looking for guilt, Inspector, I can assure you, you'll find enough to go around, but not the kind you can arrest. With that, she left, the bell above the cafe door jingling faintly behind her. Maigret stood for a long time after she'd gone, the taste of unzipped coffee bitter in his mouth. Outside, the drizzle had thickened again, veiling the slope of Montmartre in silver. The proprietor hovered nearby, uncertain whether to ask a question. Maigret spoke without looking at him. Tell me, does she come here often? Every few weeks, never with company. Does she always sit by the door? Yes, monsieur. Says she likes to see who comes and goes. Maigret nodded, took his coat, and stepped back into the rain. The hill was quieter now, the street glistening like a long, narrow secret. Somewhere, the bells of Sacré-Cœur tolled through the mist. He walked down toward the boulevard, his pipe burning steadily, his thoughts circling a woman who smiled at lies as if they were familiar friends, and a man who died waiting for one last meeting that never came. The brass key in his pocket felt heavier now. Whatever it opened, it wasn't just a door. It was the past, one that refused to stay closed. When Maigret returned home that evening, the rain had stopped, but the air still smelled of damp stone and tobacco smoke from cafe terraces closing for the night. The lamplight along Boulevard Richard-Lenoir shimmered on the wet pavement, turning puddles into small mirrors of yellow and grey. He climbed the stairs to the flat, moving more slowly than usual, the weight of the day's fragments pressing on him like water seeping through a wall. The familiar smell greeted him first, boiled potatoes, stewed leeks, and the faint trace of soap Madame Maigret always used on the tablecloth. The warmth inside felt undeserved. His wife looked up from her knitting when he entered, her expression a mix of curiosity and quiet reproach, the kind that required no words. "You're late," she said simply. "I lost track of time," he replied, hanging his coat by the stove. Steam rose faintly from it. He took off his hat, placed his pipe on the mantel, and kissed her cheek. A habit, both ritual and apology. "There's soup," she said, "and a slice of veal if you're hungry." He nodded, sitting down heavily at the table. The soup was hot, the bread fresh enough to remind him he hadn't eaten since morning. Madame Maigret poured him a glass of wine without asking. They sat in companionable silence for a while, the kind that only two people long used to each other's silences can share. At last she spoke. "Another one of your strange cases?" "They're all strange once you look too closely," he said. "Is it a murder?" "Not yet." "Then it will be," she said, with quiet certainty, resuming her knitting. "You have that face." He smiled faintly. "What face?" "The one you wear when the dead haven't finished talking to you." He laughed softly, shaking his head. But she was right. She always was. He leaned back in his chair, lighting his pipe again. The first drawer filled the room with its familiar warmth. "There's a man from Dijon," he began. "Delpierre. Found dead in a hotel room marked private. A letter that was never sent. A key with no lock. And two people who knew him well enough to lie about it. One too easily, the other too late." Madame Maigret didn't look up. "And what do you think?" "I think the truth isn't in what they said, but in what they forgot to hide." She set her needles down, her eyes resting on him with quiet intelligence. "Then stop listening to them and look at what's missing." He frowned slightly. "Missing?" She nodded toward the coat he'd hung by the stove. "You've been staring at that pocket since you sat down. What's in it?" He reached into the coat and drew out the brass key. It gleamed faintly in the lamplight, as though warmed by his touch. "This," he said, and a small card with the word "private" written on it. They were beside him. Madame Maigret tilted her head. "A key to what?" "That's what I'm asking myself." "Then you've missed something else," she said, "because keys don't matter until you know what they lock." He looked at her, curious. "You sound like Lucas." "I sound like your wife," she said gently. "Which means I pay attention. You said there was a letter that wasn't sent, and a room marked private. But you didn't mention a wallet." Maigret's pipe froze halfway to his mouth. "A wallet?" "Yes, there's always a wallet. Men like him carry their lives in it, receipts, tickets, photographs. If he was so precise as to keep a key and a letter, where's his money? Where's his identification?" He stared at her, astonished. He had gone through the man's pockets, found coins, the room key, the handkerchief, but no wallet. How had he not noticed? "You see," she said, smiling faintly. "You look at the rain and forget the umbrella." He rose, pacing the small room. The wooden floor creaked under his boots. If there was no wallet, then someone took it, but not for money. His watch was still there, his ring. Whoever it was didn't want francs. They wanted papers. "Then it wasn't a thief," she said. "No," Maigret murmured. "It was someone who knew what to take." He stopped pacing, the fog of thought clearing. He had debts in Dijon, yes, but his record was clean. If he carried letters or contracts, something linking Vernou or Madame Lefebvre, that would explain it. The missing wallet means someone went through that room before the maid found him. Someone with a key. "The brass one?" "Not that one," he said, shaking his head. "That key belonged to him. The other, the real key, belonged to whoever entered unseen." Madame Maigret resumed her knitting, her expression thoughtful. "Then you have two keys, one door, and no wallet. What does that tell you? That the door marked private was not locked to keep people out, he said slowly. It was left that way to let someone in. The room was quiet except for the ticking of the clock and the rhythmic click of her needles. He poured himself another glass of wine, sat down, and stared into the red surface as though it might hold the answer. She looked at him with affection and something like pity. You'll be up all night thinking about it. He smiled tiredly. That's what they pay me for. She reached across the table, placed her hand on his and said, They pay you to find the truth, but sometimes the truth comes when you stop looking for it. He covered her hand with his own, rough from cold and years of holding pipes and pens instead of comfort. For a moment, the case fell away. The hotel room, the rain, the lies, and all that remained was the quiet pulse of a life built on ordinary days. Then the telephone rang. He sighed and went to answer it. Maigret. It was Janvier's voice, urgent. Patron, we just heard from Dijon. There's more. The local inspector found something in Delpierre's old flat. Torn papers in the fireplace, bank drafts, correspondence, even part of a passport. Burned? Mostly, but one piece had a Paris address, Rue des Martyrs, same as Madame Lefebvre. Maigret's eyes met his wife's across the room. She stopped knitting. You see, she said softly. The missing wallet came home before you did. He replaced the receiver, grabbed his hat. They're all tied to that address somehow, the woman, the partner, even the key. Be careful, she said. Always, he murmured, though they both knew it wasn't true. He stepped into the corridor. The air outside had cooled. The rain had begun again, soft as breath. As he descended the stairs, the weight of the brass key in his pocket seemed heavier than before. It was no longer just an object. It was a witness, silent but damning, to a secret traded behind polite smiles. By the time he reached the street, the lamps had begun to blur again. He turned his collar up, watching the mist settle over the city like a curtain, preparing to rise for the next act. Somewhere in that quiet apartment on Rue des Martyrs, he thought, someone was waiting, not for discovery, but for the sound of a knock they had been dreading since the night Delpierre died. He struck a match, relit his pipe, and started walking toward the river, the taste of tobacco sharp against the cold air. Behind him, the glow of his window faded, but Madame Maigret's light, that patient, unspoken wisdom, stayed with him, steady as the thought she had given him. Look not at what is seen, but at what has been quietly taken. And what had been taken, he now knew, was more than a wallet. It was a life carefully erased, one document at a time. By dawn the next morning, Paris was already stirring under a heavy grey sky. The newspapers hit the kiosks like stones thrown into still water, each headline spreading ripples across the city's calm. Businessman found dead in Hotel Bern. Possible suicide. Tied to financial scandal. Woman seen leaving scene. It was all conjecture, but conjecture in Paris had a way of hardening into gospel before midday. Maigret read the early edition standing by a café counter near the Pont Neuf, steam from his coffee rising into the damp morning air. The article was thin, full of errors, yet beneath the careless phrasing lay a shape he recognized. Someone had leaked enough truth to make the rest sound credible. He folded the paper and left it on the counter. The rain had stopped, but the city still carried the sheen of it, the streets gleaming like the surface of an unspoken thought. At the Quai des Orfèvres, Lucas was waiting with a frown carved deep between his brows. The press got wind before we even confirmed the autopsy, he said. Somebody talked. Someone always talks, Maigret replied, hanging his coat. The trick is to know who wanted to be heard. Janvier entered a moment later with the doctor's report. Neat handwriting, clinical detachment, the sort of document that made human tragedy sound procedural. No trace of poison, he said. No sleeping draught either. Heart failure, most likely triggered by strain or shock. Shock from what? Maigret asked, scanning the report. That's for you to find out, Petrel, Janvier said with a shrug. Maigret closed the folder slowly, his mind circling the missing wallet. If it wasn't suicide, then someone wanted it to look like one, and if it was, someone still came afterward, to clean up. Lucas placed a folded paper on the desk. You'll want to see this. Morning Post came for you. The envelope bore no return address, only a Paris postmark. Inside was a single sheet typed on an ordinary machine, unsigned. You look in the wrong place, Inspector. He wasn't killed for love. He was killed for silence. Ask about the papers from Dijon. No signature, no hint of origin. The message was both taunt and warning, the sort that comes from someone who believes they're part of the story, but invisible within it. Maigret leaned back, his pipe unlit in his mouth. So now we have a chorus, he murmured. Everyone wants to tell me what I'm not seeing. Could be Vernou, Lucas said. Too neat, Maigret replied. He wouldn't risk a typewriter. Could be the woman. Janvier frowned. Madame Lefebvre? She knew about the key, Maigret said. She might want to steer us toward the wrong door. He rose, pacing. And the burned papers in Dijon, what did the local police say? Mostly illegible, Janvier replied. But they recovered a line from one letter, something about arrangements and payment for silence. The word hung in the air. Silence. Maigret's mind began to thread it all together. Delpierre's debts, the missing wallet, the partner too eager to appear helpful, the woman who spoke in riddles, the letter sealed but never sent. Blackmail, the kind that corrodes slowly, feeding on fear until someone breaks. He looked out the window, watching the barges drift along the river, their hulls heavy with coal and secrets. They say he was killed for silence, he said softly. Then the question is, whose silence was he keeping? By midday, the rumor had become a storm. Reporters crowded the steps outside the station, their pencils ready, their questions clumsy. Was it a crime of passion? Was there a scandal? Was a government official involved? Maigret pushed through them without answering, his expression that of a man carrying something fragile and dangerous. He found refuge in a small bar off Rue Saint-Denis, one of those quiet places where the city's noise fell away like rain off a roof. The bartender knew him and didn't ask questions. Maigret ordered a sandwich, didn't touch it, and spread the telegrams and notes across the counter. Delpierre's handwriting in the old ledger from Dijon. Vernou's careful denials, Madame Lefebvre's bitterness. And now this anonymous note about silence. The pieces fit like parts of a puzzle someone had deliberately cut to mislead. He thought again of the letter to Madame Lefebvre. It was still sealed in evidence, its contents unknown, but every instinct told him it was not love that filled those pages. It was confession. And confession, in the wrong hands, was currency. He finished his coffee and walked back into the afternoon light. Across the river, the bells of Saint-Sulpice tolled 2 o'clock. He found Lucas waiting by the car. "We've been to the telegraph office," Lucas said. "Guess who sent the message to Léonie Vernet last week?" "Not Delpierre," Maigret said flatly. Lucas nodded. "The clerk remembers him, or rather, someone pretending to be him. Similar build, same manner of speech, but younger. He said the man wore gloves." "Gloves?" Maigret repeated, "and of course." "And there's more. The concierge at Hotel Bern remembered seeing a second visitor the morning of the death, a man in a grey coat who asked for Delpierre's room number. She thought nothing of it. He said he was from the bank. Bank, Maigret murmured. Or from Dijon. He climbed into the car. They were going to pay Vernou another visit. They found him not at his hotel, but at a café near the Gare de Lyon, reading the afternoon paper. He greeted them with exaggerated politeness. "Inspector, have they not yet buried poor Armand? Surely your work is done?" Maigret sat across from him, eyes steady. "Almost. You were right about one thing, Monsieur Vernou. Your partner was keeping something. Something about the business, perhaps. Or you." Vernou's smile faltered. "You have no proof." "I have enough to make you uncomfortable," Maigret said. "Which is a start." He laid the anonymous note on the table. Vernou's eyes flicked over it, then back to Maigret's face. "Ever see a letter like that before?" "No." "Curious, then, that the typewriter ribbon matches the one used on your firm's correspondence." For a moment the man's jaw tightened, then relaxed. "You can't know that." "I can guess," Maigret said softly, "and my guesses are usually inconveniently close." Vernou rose abruptly, threw coins on the table. "If you intend to accuse me, do it formally. I have no more to say." "Then don't," Maigret said, not moving. "But remember, silence can be as loud as a scream when the city's listening." When Vernou was gone, Lucas exhaled. "He's cracking." "No," Maigret said, finishing the dregs of Vernou's untouched coffee. "He's tightening the lid. Blackmail works like pressure. The longer it holds, the louder it bursts." They returned to headquarters as dusk began to thicken. The lamps came alive along the river, their reflections trembling like secrets on the surface. Janvier met them at the door, breathless. "Patron, news just came. They've found Léonie Vernet." "Found?" "She tried to board a night train at Gare du Nord. No luggage, no ticket, no destination. When questioned, she panicked, said someone was following her." "Who?" "She wouldn't say, only that if she talked, she'd end up like him." Maigret's pipe fell still between his fingers. "Bring her here," he said quietly. As the rain began again outside, steady and relentless, Maigret walked to the window and watched the droplets blur the lights of the city. Somewhere the truth was cornered, trembling like a frightened animal, trapped between what it owed and what it feared. He turned back to Lucas. "Prepare a room. Tonight we'll listen to the silence speak for itself." And as he said it, the brass key in his pocket pressed against him like a reminder that doors, once opened, have a way of refusing to close. The storm that night came without warning, one of those sudden Paris tempests that make the city sound alive, the rain hammering the shutters like impatient fists. At the Quai des Orfèvres, the lamps flickered and the corridors smelled of wet wool, coffee and smoke. In one of the small interview rooms, Léonie Vernet sat shivering under a thin grey blanket, her hair damp, her gloves still on. She looked smaller than before, her fear now stripped of all pretense. A constable brought her tea she would not touch. Maigret entered without a file, without his coat, only his pipe between his fingers. He moved slowly, like a man approaching a frightened bird. She glanced up, her eyes already red, but not from tears. "I told them everything I know," she said, before he could speak. "I believe you," Maigret replied, taking a seat opposite. "But you may not know what you know." She blinked. "What do you mean?" "Sometimes truth hides in memory like a face behind glass. You see the outline, not the person." She stared at the table, her hands trembling faintly. "He shouldn't have sent for me. I told him not to." "Delpierre?" "Yes. He said he had something important, something that would make him free again. But when I got there, It was too late. Free from what? From them, she whispered. Maigret leaned forward. Who are they, Leonie? She hesitated, her eyes darting toward the closed door. I don't know their names. Only that he said they'd ruined him. He kept a record. Papers, copies of letters. He said if anything happened to him, they'd be found. That's why I think they killed him. Where were those papers? In a drawer, behind the wall.
Of his room in Dijon? He showed me once, just to prove he had them. But when the police searched after he died, they said nothing was there. They were burned, Maigret said quietly. She covered her face with her hands. Then it's over. They've taken everything. Maigret waited a long moment, letting the rain speak for them both. You said he wanted to be free. Free how? He wanted to stop paying. Paying for what? Silence. Her voice was barely audible. He said someone in Paris had letters. Proof he'd forged contracts for Vernoux's business, using his firm's stamp after it closed. He said Vernoux made him do it, but the papers had gone missing. Someone found them, someone who wanted money. Maigret's jaw tightened. A blackmailer. She nodded, eyes unfocused. He said it was a woman. Maigret said nothing for a moment. He thought of Madame Lefebvre, of the café on Rue Lepic, of her calm, knowing smile. Did he tell you her name? No, only that she met him once at the Hotel Bern. That's why he took that room again. He said she would come if he waited. Maigret's mind moved faster now, like gears beginning to catch. And the key, the brass one he was holding. He said it opened the door within the door. Her words landed like a whisper from another world. What door? I don't know. I thought it was a metaphor. He said everyone has one. The door they hide behind while pretending to be someone else. But maybe he meant something real. Maigret rose, the chair scraping softly against the tiled floor. Stay here tonight. You'll be safe. As he stepped into the corridor, Lucas was waiting, hat in hand. Patron, the hotel owner came. He brought the old renovation plans you asked for. Maigret took the folded sheets. The paper was brittle, yellowed, edges frayed. He spread them out on a nearby table, tracing the faint pencil lines with a thick finger. Third floor, room 17, here, he pointed, and next to it, an adjoining room that no longer exists. Lucas squinted. Blocked off years ago, apparently. They made a new wall. Maigret tapped the drawing again. But not solid. Look, this thin space, no more than a hand's width, enough for a hidden passage or an old service gap. Could someone fit through it? No, but someone could use it to listen, or to reach a lock with a tool. Lucas frowned. You think the killer came through the wall? Maigret shook his head slowly. No, I think the killer didn't need to. The wall hides something else. Something that belonged to Delpierre. Within the hour, they were back at the Hotel Bern. The concierge looked alarmed but not surprised. The room still smelled faintly of oil and damp linen, as though the rain had crept in to keep watch. The gaslight flickered, and in that weak flame, Maigret's shadow looked larger than life. He gestured for Lucas to
help move the desk. Dust rose in clouds. Behind it, the wallpaper peeled easily, old glue giving way. Beneath was a thin wooden panel with a small metal screw. Lucas pried it open. Inside the narrow cavity lay a leather folder, brittle but intact. Maigret took it carefully, brushing away cobwebs. It was the sort of folder used by clerks for receipts. Anonymous, unremarkable, and damning. He laid it open on the desk. Inside were folded letters, banknotes, and a small photograph. A woman, smiling faintly, wearing gloves. Madame Lefebvre. The edges of the photo were worn as if handled often. Beneath it, several pages written in Delpierre's uneven hand. "If anything happens to me, the truth lies behind the door marked private." Lucas exhaled. He knew. "Yes," Maigret said, "and he feared she'd come for these." He turned the pages. There were drafts of contracts bearing Vernoux's firm's seal, altered figures and notes in the margins, handwriting that did not match Delpierre's, Vernoux's. The dead man had kept everything. "Blackmail, then?" Lucas murmured. "He must have tried to use this against her or Vernou or both." "Maybe. Or perhaps he was trying to protect himself. The trouble with blackmail, Lucas, is that the line between victim and culprit is paper-thin, and both sides eventually cross it." He packed the documents into an evidence envelope. "We'll seal the room again," he said softly, "and no one touches it until I say." Back at headquarters, the city had grown quiet. The rain eased to drizzle, the streets glistening like tired glass. Léonie was asleep on a bench in the corridor, the blanket pulled around her shoulders. Maigret passed her without waking her. In his office, he laid the folder on the desk and poured himself a small glass of brandy. The brass key sat beside it, its purpose now clear. It had not been meant for a lock at all, but for what lay beyond. The door within the door, the truth hidden inside habit. He lifted one of the forged papers to the light. The ink shimmered faintly where it had been corrected. A single line scrawled by Delpierre's unsteady hand seemed almost a confession. "They said silence was safer than truth. I believed them too long." Maigret drank, the brandy biting like thought. He imagined the last moments in that small room, Delpierre sitting alone, the brass key in his hand, waiting for a visitor who might kill him or forgive him, and realizing, perhaps too late, that both would mean the same thing. The thunder rolled again over the city. Somewhere beyond the walls a clock struck midnight, slow and deliberate. Maigret lit his pipe once more, watching the smoke curl toward the ceiling, like the echo of a secret escaping through the cracks. The folder lay open before him, full of answers no one would want spoken aloud. He whispered to the empty room. "Now we know what the door opened. The question is, who closed it?"
Again? Outside, the rain began once more, steady and patient, washing Paris clean of nothing at all. The morning broke reluctantly, as if the city itself wished to stay asleep. The rain, a thin, relentless drizzle, had resumed some time before dawn, blurring the rooftops into a single shade of pewter. From the window of his office at the Quai des Orfèvres, Maigret watched the slow procession of umbrellas crossing the Pont Saint-Michel, a tide of grey figures moving with the patience of people who no longer expected anything new from the day. Paris, he thought, never changed. It only grew older between storms. On his desk lay the leather folder, its contents now catalogued, its significance undeniable. Beside it, a half-burnt cigarette smoked in the ashtray. He rarely smoked cigarettes, but this case had made him restless, and the pipe no longer provided enough rhythm for his thoughts. The evidence was clear enough: forged contracts, false bank drafts, and letters that tied Vernoux's failing business to deliberate fraud. There was even one page in Delpierre's hand, a confession, or perhaps an unfinished appeal for forgiveness. But what the papers didn't reveal was who had turned blackmail into death. He poured himself another cup of coffee, bitter and black, and stared at the rain. Lucas entered, hat in hand, his coat wet to the elbows. "We've been watching Vernou," he said. "He hasn't left his hotel since last night. Nervous fellow. Ordered breakfast twice and touched neither." "And the woman?" "Madame Lefebvre went out early," Lucas said. "Took a cab toward Montmartre, then to a post office. She sent a telegram. We couldn't see to whom. Maigret nodded slowly. The storm before the confession, he murmured. Lucas frowned. You think she'll talk? People always talk when they believe silence has stopped working. He reached for his coat. Let's pay her a visit before she finds her courage again. The drive through the rain was slow. Paris glistened like old silver, its gutters running with pale reflections of lamplight. When they reached Rue des Martyrs, the café terraces were empty, chairs stacked like barricades. Madame Lefebvre's apartment was on the third floor of a building that had once been elegant and was now only tired. The concierge recognized Maigret immediately and tried to appear cooperative without looking involved. She's at home, monsieur. Came back not long ago, looked unsettled. Maigret climbed the stairs, his boots leaving wet prints on the worn carpet. He knocked once. The sound was swallowed by the silence inside. Then a faint voice. Come in. She stood by the window, half in shadow, her veil lifted, her gloves on the table, beside a half-empty cup of coffee. The room smelled faintly of powder and brandy. She looked calm, too calm. Inspector, she said, you always arrive when the weather suits you. Paris provides? He
replied. You sent a telegram this morning. Her eyes narrowed. You have spies everywhere. Only where people try to hide? She gestured toward the chair. Sit then, ask your questions. You'll find the answers as dull as the rain. Maigret sat, but did not remove his hat. Delpierre was blackmailing someone. We now know he had documents linking Vernou to fraud. But those letters, madame, were not addressed to Vernou. They were addressed to you. For the first time, the calm faltered. A tremor passed across her lips, quickly hidden by a smile. And you think I killed him for that? I think he trusted you with something you didn't want to keep. She turned away, facing the window. The rain drew long silver lines down the glass. He came to me, yes, begged me to help him. He said he'd been used. By Vernou, by everyone. He wanted to confess, to make it right. But I told him the truth. Some things can't be made right. They can only be forgotten. Forgotten, Maigret repeated quietly. And when he refused to forget? She laughed softly, though her voice trembled. Then someone decided for him? Maigret stood. Where's the wallet, madame? Her shoulders stiffened. What wallet? The one taken from his body, the one that held the originals of those documents. We found the copies hidden behind the wall. The real papers were gone. You knew about them. She turned slowly. Her face had gone pale, the colour draining as if the truth had pulled it away. You think I took them? I think you were there after he died, or before. Perhaps you went to stop him from sending the letter. Perhaps Vernou sent you. Or perhaps you went for yourself. She reached for a cigarette, lit it with unsteady hands. You make it sound simple, Inspector, but life isn't one of your tidy cases. He wasn't innocent, and neither was I. Then help me untangle it. She looked up, and for a moment the hardness dropped from her face. You can't untangle what was already knotted years ago. We were young once. He lied for me. I lied for him. Vernou profited from both of us. Then came the debts, the papers, the threats. I told Armand to burn them. He couldn't. He wanted to use them to buy back his dignity. I told him it would kill him. And you were right, Maigret said quietly. She stubbed out the cigarette with a trembling hand. He sent for me that night. I didn't go. I thought I was saving myself. But I should have known he wouldn't die alone. Who did? She met his eyes. And there, behind the defiance, lay the answer. Vernou, or one of his men, I don't know. But he wanted those papers more than he wanted peace. He told me once that Paris only forgives the living. Maigret turned toward the door. You'll stay in the city. We may need you again. She smiled faintly. You already have everything you need, Inspector. The papers, the key, the motive. All that's left is the rain. Outside, the wind had risen, the gutters overflowed, the street turning to a river. Lucas waited by the car, coat collar high. Well? He asked. She didn't kill him, Maigret said, but she watched him drown. Then Vernou? Perhaps, but there's one thing he won't expect. We'll let him think he's free. The guilty talk loudest when they believe they're safe. Back at headquarters, the light was fading to evening. The rain beat steady against the windows, a constant whisper. Maigret stood over the folder one last time, tracing the neat, desperate handwriting of the man who had tried too late to cleanse his conscience. If anything happens to me, the truth lies behind the door marked private. He closed the file and locked it in the cabinet. The brass key, warm from his pocket, glinted faintly in his palm before he set it beside the folder. Lucas, he said quietly, keep eyes on Vernou. He'll make his move tonight. How do you know? Maigret looked toward the rain-darkened window. Because it's raining again, and men like Vernou always mistake rain for luck. As Lucas left, Maigret leaned back in his chair, the pipe smoke rising in thin, uncertain threads. Paris outside was blurred and breathing, a living thing caught between guilt and forgetfulness. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistled, a low, mournful sound, like a confession lost in the storm. And Maigret, weary but awake, whispered to himself, "It isn't over, not until the rain stops remembering." The rain that had haunted the city for days softened into mist by dawn, drifting low over the river like smoke over cooling embers. The bells of Saint-Germain rang somewhere beyond the fog, faint and hollow, marking another morning that felt older than it was. Paris, still glistening from the night's downpour, seemed quieter than usual, as if holding its breath, waiting for something inevitable. Maigret arrived at the Quai des Orfèvres before most of the clerks. The corridors smelled of damp paper and overbrewed coffee, the kind of smell that meant a long day ahead. He went straight to his office, set down his hat, and stood for a moment by the window. The Seine moved sluggishly below, heavy with rainwater and secrets. The folder from the Hotel Bern still sat on his desk, a faint ring of moisture marking where his glass had been the night before. The brass key lay beside it, dull now, the shine worn away by handling. He didn't light his pipe. Not yet. At 7, Lucas entered, shaking rain from his hat. "He's on the move," he said without preamble. "Vernou?" Lucas nodded. "Left his hotel an hour ago, took a cab toward the Gare de Lyon. No luggage. He's nervous." Maigret picked up his coat and hat, the key slipping into his pocket with a familiar weight. "He's not running," he said. "He's going to meet someone." The streets were still wet, reflecting the morning light in pale grey ribbons. They found Vernou outside a small café across from the station, sitting alone beneath the awning, a newspaper open but unread in front of him. He looked like a man waiting for a train he hadn't bought a ticket for. When he saw Maigret approach, his mouth tightened, but he didn't move. "Leaving town?" Maigret asked, sitting down opposite him. "Considering it. Paris doesn't mind," Maigret said mildly. "But the dead do. They dislike loose ends." Vernou's eyes flickered toward the crowd of travellers hurrying into the station. "You can't prove anything." Maigret smiled faintly. "You're right. Proof is for judges. I deal in truth. Sometimes they overlap." The waiter arrived with 2 coffees. Vernou didn't touch his. Maigret stirred his, slowly, not drinking either. "You went to the Hotel Bern," he said. "The morning he died. The concierge remembers. You said you were from the bank." I went to collect papers, Vernou said evenly. Papers that belong to our business. Papers you'd rather burn than read. The man's composure cracked. He was blackmailing me, Inspector. He said he'd keep those forgeries unless I paid. I didn't kill him. I only wanted them back. Maigret watched the steam rise between them. And did you get them? Vernou hesitated. No, he refused to see me. I waited in the corridor. When I finally went in, He stopped. The words hung unfinished. Dead? Maigret asked softly. Vernou nodded, staring down at his untouched cup. I panicked. I found his wallet, saw the papers inside and took them. I swear he was already gone. Then why not tell us? Because of what was in them, Vernou said, voice low. It would have destroyed me. And for what? He was already beyond help. And what did you do with them? I burned them. Maigret leaned back, studying him through the curl of steam. You burned his silence, Monsieur Vernou, but not your own. The man looked up sharply. You can't arrest me for that. I won't, Maigret said. There are no charges left to bring, only consequences. They sat in silence, listening to the steady patter of water dripping from the awning. Trains rumbled in the distance, iron wheels on wet rails. Maigret thought of Delpierre, sitting alone in that dim room, clutching a key to a door no one else would open. A man who wanted to end his guilt, but not his life, and who found both waiting when he turned the handle. At last, Vernou stood. If you've finished, Inspector, I have a train to catch. Maigret nodded. Of course, you're free to go. The man hesitated. That's it? That's it. But if you're clever, you'll never come back. Vernou's eyes narrowed. And if I do? Then you'll find that Paris remembers its ghosts. He left without another word, vanishing into the blur of travellers. Lucas watched from across the street. He's really leaving? Yes, Maigret said, but the city has longer arms than he thinks. They walked back along the quay. The clouds had begun to thin, patches of pale blue appearing like hesitant confessions. At headquarters, Janvier was waiting. Patron, we released Mademoiselle Vernet this morning. She's gone back to her aunt's in Montrouge. Good, Maigret said. Let her forget this. And Madame Lefebvre? She sent flowers to the morgue, Janvier said quietly. No note. Maigret sighed. Paris does love its gestures. He dismissed them both and sat alone in his office. The brass key lay before him again, small and ordinary, yet heavier than anything in the room. He turned it once in his hand, then slid it into the drawer and locked it away. For a long while he sat without moving. The light through the window had turned golden, thin as gauze. Outside, the river glittered like tarnished glass. Cases ended, but their echoes didn't. They lingered in the corners of the mind, in the rhythm of footsteps along the quay, in the faint sound of rain against shutters long after the sky had cleared. He thought of Delpierre, of the letter he never sent, of Léonie's trembling hands, of Madame Lefebvre's quiet defiance, of Vernou's pale, sweating face. Each had built their own door marked private, and each had stepped through it believing they could leave the past behind. But doors like that never opened outward. He rose, went to the window, and lit his pipe. The first puff filled the room with a familiar warmth. Below, the city was returning to itself. Children running along the quay, barges nudging the water, the faint sound of laughter from a cafe already setting its tables for evening. Life continued, indifferent, as it always did. When the phone rang, he let it ring twice before answering. Maigret. It was Lucas. He boarded the train, alone, headed south. Good, Maigret said simply. Let the rain wash him away. He hung up, leaned against the windowsill and watched the clouds part over the Seine. The air smelled clean again, as though the city had exhaled. He smiled faintly, more weary than content. Another door closed, he murmured to the empty room. The smoke from his pipe drifted upward, curling into the last ray of sunlight as it broke through the fog. For a moment, the light caught the brass key on his desk, making it shine again, a small, fleeting glimmer, like memory forgiving itself. Then the cloud passed, the glow faded, and the office fell quiet except for the faint ticking of the clock and the steady, eternal rhythm of the river beyond the glass. The door marked private had closed at last, and Paris, faithful as always, forgot nothing.